I want to further unpack some of the things that you said first. And starting with the umbrella of governance, coming with the domestic part. Now, before we delve into what needs to be done, I want to just take a moment to understand where we stand right now. And in that context, can you tell us what have been the most important changes in the past 7 years under the Modi government?
Oh, absolutely. So I think I would put it under 3 buckets in terms of domestic governance, especially with the focus in the last 7-8 years under the BJP government led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. First, I would say hard infrastructure. Then I would say soft infrastructure. Then I would say digital governance and reforms, okay, which is like the software. I think that the hard infrastructure is very important to appreciate how boring it is, but how important it is. Like, unlike the Chinese population, which is along the river valleys and the coasts, so along, South China Sea, East China Sea, basically on the Pacific basin, the Chinese population is basically in the eastern coast. Indian population density, like UP, especially East UP, Bihar, parts of Bengal, is very much along the Ganga Valley, the Indo-Gangetic plains. They are along the river, but they are nowhere close to the sea. And this, for example, all of UP is now 230 to 40 million, I'm guessing in 2021, to maybe to 250 million, perhaps slightly less. Bihar is probably 120 million. And then if you want to add Bengal, another 110 million maybe, right? So that's almost 500 million people, right? Right there, almost 500 million people. And then of course there are parts of Rajasthan, MP, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Uttaranchal. So we are talking about, say, 600 million odd people, right, who historically use the rivers for transportation. But what happened is, because of population explosion, for irrigation and drawing out more and more canals, the water flow in the rivers became less and they were no longer navigable for commerce. So what happened is, our industrial base, along with other reasons, we can go to dedicated, like freight equalization, which led to more and more jobs in industries going to existing clusters like Maharashtra and Gujarat, because whether you would get coal from Jharkhand in Calcutta or Bombay, it was the same. And along with bad politics, unionization, whatever you want to discuss, it became so that this 500, 600 million people were cut off from the global economy, effectively. That it was not viable in a cost sense to manufacture deep somewhere in Uttar Pradesh and export from there, or even serve the entire Indian market. So, but because the density population is so high, like for example, Bihar is now approaching almost 2,000 people per square kilometers, in definitely 1,500, right? It's about 90,000 square kilometers with 120, 130 million people. So it's already around 1,400, 1,500 people per square kilometer, and it will reach about 2,000, if I'm not wrong. Just for comparison, New York, greater New York area, not Manhattan, but greater New York area has a population density that's much less than that. And that's the most dense in the US, and that's a metropolitan region. What I'm trying to say is, they're very poor, they're underserved, but they're very dense. So infrastructure here goes a long way. So unlike the Chinese right now, who are building infrastructure to keep GDP targets, or how the Americans are different, the Japanese, they have a quotation there, bridge to nowhere. Like, you're literally building a bridge because you want to create economic activity. But in the case of UP, Bihar, Bengal, parts of North India, which are relatively less developed than South India and West India, one good expressway, one good dedicated freight corridor, semi-high-speed rail goes a long distance, and we are building that. So that, I think we have really spent a lot of money there, and the fruits of that will be seen. For example, the way the Golden Quadrilateral was made under Vajpayee, but the fruits took time to be visible. And of course, along with that, so that's the hard infrastructure. And the financing of it, including InvITs and REITs, and investment infrastructure trusts and all that. We'll come into finance part later. The soft infrastructure. Obviously, we are going through a pandemic. Hopefully, we are close to it. So there's health, there's education, there is deworming. One of the biggest deworming programs is in the world is in India, which has not been talked about much, but that leads to massive benefits for the child throughout his or her life. But more more prosaic things like gas, like cooking gas, like electricity, like pakka road, like toilets, sanitation. So imagine so many people, and of course, something which is not done by the government, but facilitated by the government, very ubiquitous and cheap internet through feature phones partially, but mostly cheap smartphones now. So now suddenly this 500 million people, and it's not just one government to be fair, but this government has accelerated the process, in the last 10 years or so have gone from being, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but from village hamlets where they would sew their own clothes and not necessarily consume outside products, to being integrated not just into the Indian economy, but almost to the global economy. In larger Indian hamlets, villages are actually towns. I mean, Indian urbanization rates are actually underestimated by official data because we have some of the most stringent definitions of what constitutes urbanization. So like if you have 5,000 people in a so-called village, that's a town in most parts of the world. So in India, what's happening now is if you're giving a town-like infrastructure and your Amazon and Flipkarts can deliver some stuff there, forget the local guy who's sewing clothes, he or she can also use those better roads. You are suddenly what Adam Smith would call the extent of the market defines the scope of specialization. And specialization defines how productive any economy is, right? So basically, the larger the market, the more interconnected the market, the more any one entity can specialize, and therefore he or she can be more productive. So the biggest change has been on the hard infrastructure and then the soft infrastructure. Now, of course, helping a lot of this is reforms, which will also show, like, for example, GST. Like, we are going through a tough time in the pandemic, but we are seeing record GST numbers right now this year. We saw 2 months of 1.3 lakh crores plus, so almost $20 billion, and which is not just higher compared to last year, but even higher compared to the year before, the pre-pandemic numbers, in a trend adjusted manner. So these are very, very impressive numbers. Direct tax collections. So there is an increase in the fiscal capacity of the state. There is financialization. There are some errors. I think, for example, part of the benefits of demonetization were undone by increasing the top income tax bracket, because ultimately you want money to get out of the black usage. I think when the markets improve, we might also see connecting of the property transactions to your Aadhaar and so on. So the final uses of cash could also be reduced. The idea is to have low but broad tax bases so that all transactions are done formally, a proper amount of taxes are paid to the state, the economy grows, the country grows, and those resources can be used for making our broad citizenry more productive. So welfare, but welfare targeted in a manner, of course, sometimes will be just cash transfers, but targeted in a manner that they're more productive. For example, schools and colleges and health and cooking gas and better roads, etc. So I think getting something like GST or Insolvency Bankruptcy Code or the Real Estate Regulation Act, these are things which have a lot of vested interests. So just pushing that through requires massive political capital, stability. You also have to do a U-turn in a couple of cases, like Narendra Modi has done with the land acquisition and now the farm reforms, right? But that also shows that, okay, I mean, as I say, if you're not getting back from some things, are you even trying hard enough, right? I mean, the fact that you had to kind of withdraw from a couple of things shows that you were really pushing the envelope. So I think really what they've done is getting re-elected with the majority. That by itself gives political stability to India. Then doing these supply side reforms, then doing these hard and soft infrastructure. One criticism I would say is they did not manage the demand side as well as they could have. Like, they were partially the culpabilities with the earlier two RBI governors. But even on the fiscal side, I think they were too conventionally, quote unquote, small c conservative, which generally shows good instincts that at least the prime minister is not trying to win elections purely through fiscal outlays. Although, of course, like any politician, he will tweak it a bit here and there. But over and above politics, I think India has a lot of capacity utilization gap. Right. And when exports were stagnant for the last few years until this year, they should have run the demand a bit faster on the fiscal side. But those 2-3 criticisms aside, they've really done a lot of reforms. The infrastructure part is what will really increase India's economic capacity in the 2020s. So I think these are classic short-term pain, long-term gain decisions.
Right.
And the fact that they can do that and get re-elected shows good political management, because that was the curse in people's minds that, look, Vajpayee did all these good things, but he lost the election in 2004. In fact, the credit went to Manmohan Singh's two-term government in many ways, the good stuff that happened in 98 to 2004. And therefore, why should we do it was the narrative, right? So how do you do it? How do you sequence it? How do you pace it, even though some mistakes will happen? And how do you get re-elected to be able to sell it internally in a political sense? I think that is the overall achievement on the political economy side, in my view.
Very interesting, Harsh. And I think what stands out is also the consistency in the last 7 years that we have seen, that it has not been a one-off thing. I mean, we've seen GST, we've seen labor reforms, we've seen things like privatization of certain PSUs. And the process has been going on. So it hasn't really been a one-off thing. And then
so reform is a process. It's not an event.
Yes.
In fact, I am somebody who speaks a lot about the open capital convertibility, capital account convertibility, and the RBI often says it's a process. It's not an event.
Yeah.
So, like for example, on labor reforms, they're kind of going a bit slow right now. Right. On power reforms, also they're going a bit slow right now, partially because I'm sure politics is one reason. Yeah. The farm reform U-turn is one reason, but the idea is you don't stop. Right. So what happens is cumulatively over 5 years, 7 years, 10 years across sectors, one day you wake up and you realize, oh my God, a lot of reforms have been done, yeah. Even though on any one particular weekday or weekend, it doesn't seem like Big Bang. Yeah. You can have these occasional symbolic Air India privatizations you rightly mentioned or alluded to, which for some people was the litmus test of reform. Yeah. But basically, it's the cumulative impact more than the Big Bang headline. I think that has really moved the needle. Because if you compare it to the two terms of UPA, 1 and 2, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had a lot of credibility from his finance minister days. Right. Even though, of course, the then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao had to give the political capital for that to happen. But really, they did not do much reforms in those 10 years. They were basically coasting along on a global easy cycle, and the reforms and infrastructure investments done earlier. There was infrastructure investments that happened in UPA times, but it was a very credit-driven, bank-driven, which created NPAs later on during Modi's early years. So it was very cronyist, and there was no new reforms at the policy level done. So, sometimes input and output, there is a lag. So, the growth rates are comparable for the two administrations so far, but what has gone in is dramatically different. And I'm comparing the Manmohan Singh's 10 years and Narendra Modi's 7.5 years so far.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.